All right, folks, quick tutorial on using CalTopo to set yourself up with a map. Once you've logged into caltopo.com and then created an account for yourself, you'll have to hit a button that says Start Mapping, and then you have to tell it in this box up here where you want to go. And so I've just headed straight into the area of the Rocky Mountain front, which is where the fall trek has occurred since the mid-70s. The next thing you have to do anytime you're making a CalTopo map is choose the right base layer. And if you come over here where it says Map Builder Topo, in the drop-down menu, you'll see there's a whole lot of options for what base layer to use. It's always going to give you this Map Builder Topo as a default, and that's not ideal. That's not the map base layer that I want you to choose. So I would either recommend scanned topographic maps, or another option is to come all the way down here under these preset combinations and choose the 7.5 minute topo maps. So 7.5 minute topo maps. Either one of those is perfect. Forest Service base layer maps are awesome, except when you're in an area where there's no Forest Service land. If you're on BLM land, this will look blank. So that's why I usually choose scan topos. And this is the screen that you'll get. Another option that you could CalTopo offers you is aerial imagery. So this global imagery or the National Agriculture Information Project here imagery. And so if I click on that instead, notice what comes up is a satellite image. It's nowhere near as good as Google Earth Pro, but it can give you really great information nevertheless if you want to zoom down in to the landscape. The sweet thing about CalTopo is that it allows you to stack base layers. So over here, if I go back and I choose my scanned topo base layer, I can click here where it says stack base layer, and I can put another base layer on top of that. So let's say I want my topographic information, but I also want some of this aerial imagery. I can stack a base layer, but I'm going to have to decide how much of that information I want. So I can push it up, push it up, push it up. Now I'm sitting at about, 72% opacity with this aerial photo layer on top of my scanned topos. And so you can see that you get both bits of information then. You can see that this is all this here is going to be above tree line, or it's scree slopes. For whatever reason, there's no forest on it. Same thing over here on this hillside. So that's really nice information to be able to stack those to the degree that it helps. So for now, I'm just going to click off on that and just go back to only one base layer. Other thing I want to just quickly point out before we move on to how are you going to generate your own map is all these map overlays can be very interesting. You can click on cell coverage and choose a cell phone provider or all of them, right? And it will give you pixels here demonstrating, well, here, let's just do whatever, Verizon. All right, so Verizon has cell coverage, or should, in these areas that are highlighted in red. That's kind of interesting to know. Click off on that. You can also look at fire history, and fire history can be valuable to you if you want to know if you're hiking in an area that has recently burned. And so notice that all of this orange here, you can come down and know that it was burned sometime between 2007 and 2011. Everything that's in yellow was burned in any time between 2000 and 2006. So like here's the Nanny Creek fire up here. Rival Creek burned in 2006. This whole area, this whole orange layer was from 2000. This Fool Creek fire, 2007. Why is that useful for you to know? Because all of this area is likely to have dead standing timber that was burned. It might be low coverage, in other words, not very shady, because you're not going to be down in the timber. A lot of burned stuff will be standing. There could also be hazards in here in terms of standing dead trees. So that's useful to know. We're going to click off of that and click on fire activity. So this layer gives you current information, current satellite information on what fires are burning in the area. So we're going to give this a minute to load. And what you notice is that at least in the Rocky Mountain Front region, as of August 27th, there are no fires burning in this Rocky Mountain Front region. But if I'm just going to move my map over and notice that there's a fire called the Bruce Fire. This is the Kaw Mountain Fire up here. So these are in the Bob Marshall, and this is the burned area perimeter here. And this shows when the most recent satellite updates were for that fire, or those two fires. If I zoom way out, you're going to just start seeing gobs of fires all over the west. And right, so here's an old fire that happened. This is the Big Knife Fire, the Colt Fire, Middle Ridge. These are ones that are burning currently in 2023. That's helpful if you want to take a quick look before you head in somewhere and see what's going to be nearby, what fires are burning nearby, where you might want to go. Okay, I'm going to click that off. So now let's zoom back into our area that we want to explore and potentially create a map for. Here's an area. This is the Pine Butte Swamp Nature Conservancy Preserve that goes all the way out onto the Rocky Mountain Front. And this is the South Fork of the Teton River Road in here. And then this is the West Fork of the Teton River Road up here. And this is an area that I'll show you how to make a map with. Once you've chosen your base layers, then you can just click right here, this little arrow, and that'll go away. And at any time, if you want those base layers back or you want to change them, that's how you do that. So over here, what I want to show you is how to add markers and how to add routes. So this button here that says add, I'm going to click on that, and there's gobs of things that you can add that might be helpful to you, but let's just start out with markers. So if I click on marker, a red dot shows up, and I can move that red dot around to wherever I want to start. So let's just say that I want to start right here at this Middle Fork trailhead. I'm going to zoom in a little bit tighter so we can see what we're doing. So I just put that red dot there. If you come down here to the bottom right-hand part of the screen, you can see that I can choose the style. I can change the style. So I could put whatever I want in there. If I want to show a trailhead, I could put a car symbol. And now, well, here, let's change our color too. I can pick whatever color I want. But now you can see my car icon is set up at that Middle Fork trailhead. If I want, I can put a label on it, and I'll show you why you may or may not want to do that. So once I make a marker, it's going to want me to save my map. And you have to do this if you want to be able to get back to your map. And so let's just say, I'm going to make a name for this map, Fall Trek. I'm going to call it Fall Trek X because I have lots of Fall Trek maps that I've already saved. So this is our Fall Trek X. So now you get to decide whether you want your map to be accessible to other people or only to you. I'm going to make it public because I've already used up my private map quota, but you get to decide if you want to make it private or public, and then save. So now you'll notice this rectangle up here says Fall Trek X. So that's telling you that that's your Fall Trek map. So one thing that I want to point out is that when you add a marker, if you give it a label, what's going to happen is that the word for that label, right, stays, and the icon stays regardless of how far out you zoom. Okay. And so one problem that can occur is that if you make lots of markers, which you hopefully will, the text here is going to get so jumbled that when you look at that map, there's just going to be words all over your map. And so so if I want to get rid of that, I just click back on it and I edit. And instead of putting the title where it says label, I put it in the comments. And I can put all kinds of comments in here. I can say, vehicle parked at trailhead, or whatever comments I want to make, I can put here. Okay, so then on my map, all that information doesn't show up, but it shows up over here in the narrative section of my map. Okay. And when I click on it, the information shows up here, whatever information I wanted, but I don't have to see it on my map. Okay. The other thing that you may want to do is add a route or a leg, right? So if you're going to be hiking for multiple days, you might want to identify where you're going. So another possibility is you add a line. Here, before I do that, I typically choose the color, line weight. Do I want it thick or thin? The line opacity over here, do I want it solid or 90% opacity? I usually just leave it solid, but you see I can choose lots of styles for the lines I want. I tend not to choose anything other than a straight line or a solid line because these get very jumbled. You can imagine when you choose them. So I'm going to leave this right now as it is, the color, the weight, the style. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to zoom in a little bit. And you notice that I can just start clicking, and now my line, I can just follow along the trail, let's say. So I'm just clicking along like this. Okay, if I double click at the end, now I have this line highlighted, and just watch what happens when I zoom out. That line continues to be there. Okay, so that's the leg for my route. Why is that helpful? A couple things. If you notice at the top of my screen, it says 1.25 miles. So if I click on this, it highlights the leg and it tells me that that's a distance of 1.25 miles. The other thing about this is I can click on it and I can come up with a profile. So if you click on that profile, notice at the bottom of my screen, I now have this profile, and if you watch as I move my cursor along, there's a red dot that follows along, and so I can tell that up here at this exact point is the highest part of my journey. This also gives you a gross or overall elevation gain and an overall elevation loss. And you might think, if I'm hiking upstream, how could I have had any elevation loss? But notice in here there's a little bit of a dip, so you lose approximately 27 feet of elevation. One thing to mention is that there's always a vertical exaggeration when they create profiles. So just be aware of that. This, if you look at this red line, you may think, oh my goodness, like look how much elevation I have to hike, but really you're only gaining 292 feet over that distance. Okay, makes sense? That's a profile. And that can be super helpful when you're planning routes and thinking about a day. How long are you going that day? How much elevation are you going to gain? Where's the high point? That sort of thing. One thing that makes life really easy is that if I go to, I'll do another line. If I go to add another line, let's say I start here. One thing I can do is, rather than having to manually click my cursor to follow all of this, I can do what's called snap to. And so up here, I can snap to, and right now it says none. But if I snap to Forest Service, for example, it's going to highlight in yellow all of its routes. And so if I just click on this, I can just run my cursor. I don't have to do any more clicking. I can just follow that for a really long way, and then single click to finish. And then I can keep moving my cursor. Come over here. I don't have to really do anything except just move my cursor along. I don't have to do any clicking at all. And now it will follow along that exact route. And there's my whole line. Notice that if I go to add a line, maybe instead of following along and snapping to Forest Service routes, it can snap to hydro. So what if I want to follow up a creek and identify the area that a creek would be running? Let's just, for the heck of it, turn that blue. I could start down here and just again follow along, and it'll highlight every creek that's on here, or any water source of any kind. When you do that, you can choose what options to snap to. Sometimes if you want to, let's just do this one more time. Let's just say I don't want to snap to anything because this is the motor vehicle use map, so that might snap to roads. OSM will also snap to roads. Lines will snap to roads. So if snapping to something is helpful to you, great. But if it isn't, in the case of, let's just say I want to hike up this ridge and I want to like follow along this ridge right here until I get up to this point, I don't want to have it snapping to anything. I just want to be able to give it the line that I want rather than it identifying something and forcing me to choose that thing. Okay. I guess the other things that I want to say about this, if I wanted to create a profile for this, notice that this profile starts where I began and it's moving along to the west, right? But I can also ask it to reverse that. And if I go on here under modify, I can say reverse. And now when I click on the profile, it's going to start from the west and head east. Okay, that might be helpful at some point to you. A couple other things. When you go to modify, or modifying is really handy because maybe you didn't create the trail as long as you wanted it to, or maybe you need to extend the trail and make it longer. So if I go extend, I can come over here and just continue to, let's say I'm snapping to nothing at this point. I'm just clicking along and I'm extending it to here. Okay, now that's just added a segment to my route. Okay, so those are the two main things that you're probably going to need right away. One slick thing that you might try at some point is to do a polygon. And if you snap on a polygon, let's say I want to know the area that is encompassed by this, I don't know, let's just say I want to understand how much land mass is encompassed in this kind of high elevation above tree line area here. So I just click all the way around it. I'm just randomly clicking. When I come back and click and make a closed loop, it's going to shade in that area. And the nice thing about that is it'll tell you the acreage. It says that encompassed within the perimeter of this line is 467 acres. It tells you how many square feet that is. That can be a handy thing if you're trying to identify places or aerial extent of some feature that you're interested in. Okay, you can play around with the rest of this, but one thing that you're all going to need to do is print your own map. And so if I come down here to the printer icon, this is what you're going to end up with. And so when you print your own map, it'll immediately identify an area that it will print. And so you can grab this red dot in the middle and move that print area around. And then come over onto this left-hand ribbon. The orientation I always choose right away so that I get the area that I want. I can do portrait or landscape. And obviously you can tell that I can zoom the size of it. If I only want that little area, I can zoom down or out. And if I come back up here to the general settings, I'm most likely going to be printing this on 8.5 by 11, and the scale is not fixed. If I somehow want the scale to be fixed, then I tell it, and it's going to only give me that exact size. So this is saying this is a 1 to 12,000 ratio. I would strongly encourage you to always put UTM grid lines on your maps. We'll talk later about what those are good for. But I would encourage you to check that you do want UTM grid lines. And then what you want to do is generate a PDF. And you'll see the PDF that you're going to get. It's going to take a second. There it is. So that's now the map that I'm going to end up printing. And it handily puts a scale at the bottom. It also puts the magnetic north versus grid north versus what's called quote-unquote true north, which we can talk about later. But it'll give you an actual legend, so you don't have to do any of that. You can choose if you want to put anything else in the legend, but that's probably what you need right there. And so this is now a map that you can print or save and use in whatever way you want. Okay, that's your quick CalTopo primer.